An orphaned Shoeshine boy shared his lunch with a beggar, only to learn he fed a secret billionaire. This simple act of kindness would forever alter the course of 12-year-old Elijah Carter's life. Though on that bitter November morning, survival was his only concern. The wind cut through Elijah's threadbare jacket as he huddled in the alcove of Chester Station, his small wooden Shoeshine box clutched protectively against his chest. 3 months since the fire had claimed both his parents and their modest apartment above the laundromat. 3 months of surviving on the streets, of sleeping in shelters when he could get in, of avoiding the social workers who might ship him off to some foster home where he'd just be another mouth to feed. Elijah's stomach growled, a painful reminder that he hadn't eaten since yesterday noon. His fingers, red and chapped from the cold, fumbled with the latch of his box. Inside lay his most precious possessions: 3 tins of polish, 2 worn brushes with uneven bristles, and a collection of rags that had once been his father's undershirts. Beneath them, wrapped carefully in plastic, sat half a sandwich, peanut butter on day-old bread, that Mrs. Abernathy from the corner deli had slipped him last night. "Gonna be a cold one today, honey," she'd said, her eyes soft with a pity that made Elijah's spine stiffen with pride, even as his fingers gratefully closed around the food. "You come by later if you need warming up." The station clock read 6:47 a.m. The morning rush would begin soon, businessmen with expensive shoes hurrying to important meetings. On good days, Elijah could make enough for a hot meal and maybe even put $1 or $2 aside in the small tin can he kept hidden in a brick cavity near the abandoned lot where he sometimes slept. "Shine, sir?" "Best shine in the city, only $2. He called automatically as the first wave of commuters began to flow through the station. Most passed by without a glance, their eyes fixed on phones or watches, minds already at desks and meetings far from this cold corner where a boy fought daily for his existence. By mid-morning, Elijah had earned $4.50. Not terrible, but not enough for both lunch and dinner. His hands ached from the cold and repetitive motion, and his stomach twisted with hunger. Just as he was considering eating his precious sandwich, the station doors swung open, admitting a blast of frigid air and a stooped figure that shuffled rather than walked. The man was old, at least in his 60s, Elijah guessed, with a gray beard that appeared not so much grown as accumulated, like debris caught in a storm drain. His clothes were mismatched and stained, a once fine overcoat now frayed at the cuffs, pants too large for his frame, secured with what looked like twine rather than a belt. But it was his eyes that caught Elijah's attention, pale blue and startlingly clear, like pieces of sky peering through the wreckage of his face. The old man settled heavily on a bench across from Elijah's corner, his breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. He sat motionless, staring at nothing, hands resting limply on his knees. There was something in his stillness that made Elijah uncomfortable. Not threatening, but familiar in a way he couldn't identify. Another hour passed. The rush slowed to a trickle, and Elijah's hopes for more customers dwindled. The old man hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't acknowledged anything around him. His stillness had shifted from strange to concerning. Elijah's fingers moved to his Shoeshine box, tracing the wood his father had helped him sand and varnish just last spring. "A man's got to have a trade," Dad had said, his voice gruff but kind. "Something he can be proud of, something no one can take away." Before he could second-guess himself, Elijah had crossed the station floor, sandwich in hand. "Sir?" His voice came out smaller than intended. The old man didn't react. Elijah cleared his throat and tried again. "Sir, are you hungry?" Slowly, those sky-blue eyes focused on Elijah's face. The man blinked once, twice, as if waking from a dream, or perhaps entering one. "What's that, boy?" His voice was unexpectedly cultured, the rough clothing and appearance at odds with the clear diction. Elijah held out the half sandwich, suddenly embarrassed by its meager appearance. "I thought, maybe you'd like some lunch." The man's gaze shifted from Elijah's face to the offered food, then back again. Something flickered in those blue eyes. Surprise, confusion, and something deeper that Elijah couldn't name. "You're offering me your lunch?" The question held no judgment, just genuine puzzlement. Elijah shrugged, trying to seem casual, though his stomach protested at the thought of giving away his only guaranteed meal. "I've got money for more," he lied. "You look like you could use it more than me." A long moment passed between them. Then, with hands that trembled slightly, the old man accepted the sandwich. "Thank you," he said simply, but the words carried a weight that seemed to fill the empty spaces of the station. Elijah nodded awkwardly and retreated to his corner, telling himself the hollow feeling in his stomach was just hunger, not the ache of remembering how his mother had always shared what little they had with neighbors who had even less. The old man ate slowly, methodically, with a kind of deliberate dignity that seemed to transform the simple act into something ceremonial. When he finished, he carefully folded the plastic wrap and tucked it into his pocket. Then, to Elijah's surprise, he stood and walked over to the Shoeshine stand. "How much for a shine?" he asked, gesturing to his shoes. Cracked leather Oxfords that had once been expensive, but now were scuffed and water-stained. Elijah hesitated. The man clearly had no money to spare. "It's okay," he said. "Don't worry about it." The old man shook his head firmly. "A fair exchange is not charity," he said. "Your kindness has already been given freely. This would be business." He pulled a crumpled dollar bill from his pocket and held it out. "One shine, please." Something about the man's dignity made refusal impossible. Elijah nodded and gestured to the small platform in front of his box. "Have a seat, sir." As Elijah worked on the battered shoes, he found himself speaking. About the cold weather, about business being slow, about his hopes to save enough for a warmer coat before December hit in full force. The old man said little but listened intently, those blue eyes never wavering from Elijah's face. When Elijah finished, the shoes looked better. Not new, but respectably clean, and with a soft shine that belied their age and wear. "Excellent work," the old man said, inspecting the results with genuine appreciation. "You have skilled hands, young man." "My dad taught me," Elijah said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. He said, his throat tightened unexpectedly. He said doing something well matters, even if nobody notices. The old man nodded slowly. "Your father was a wise man." He stood, placing the dollar bill carefully on top of the box. "Thank you for the lunch and the shine. Perhaps our paths will cross again." "Yeah, maybe," Elijah replied, not believing it for a moment. People drifted through his life now, appearing and disappearing like morning fog. Remembering them was a luxury he couldn't afford. Attachment was a weight that would only drag him down. The man turned to go, then paused. "What's your name, son?" "Elijah." "Elijah Carter." Something flickered across the old man's face. Recognition? Surprise? But it passed so quickly Elijah thought he might have imagined it. "Well, Elijah Carter, my name is William." He offered no last name. "I'm here most Tuesdays. Perhaps I'll see you next week." And then he was gone, shuffling through the station doors and into the swirling November snow. That night, huddled beneath 3 blankets in a corner of St. Martin's shelter, Elijah's stomach growled with hunger. But as he drifted toward sleep, it wasn't food he thought of, but those clear blue eyes and the strange dignity of the old man called William. True to his word, William appeared the following Tuesday and the Tuesday after that. Each time, he would sit on the same bench, watching the comings and goings of the station with quiet attention. And each time, Elijah would find himself wandering over, sometimes with half a sandwich to share, sometimes just to sit in companionable silence. William never offered much about himself, where he lived, what had brought him to his current circumstances, but he listened to Elijah with an attention no one had given the boy since his parents died. He asked thoughtful questions about Elijah's shoeshine technique, about the books he'd read before leaving school, about his dreams for the future that were becoming increasingly difficult to articulate. "Winter's coming on hard," William observed on their 5th Tuesday, as sleet rattled against the station windows. "Do you have somewhere warm to sleep, Elijah?" Elijah shrugged, uncomfortable with the direct question. "I manage." William's gaze was steady, unrelenting in its concern. "The shelters are overcrowded this time of year." "I'm okay," Elijah insisted, suddenly angry, though he couldn't have said why. "I don't need anyone worrying about me." William nodded, accepting the rebuff with grace. "Independence is valuable," he said after a moment, "but so is wisdom about when to accept help." The words stayed with Elijah that night as he huddled in his usual brick alcove. The shelters indeed full to capacity as temperatures plummeted below freezing. His fingers and toes grew numb despite the layers of newspaper he'd stuffed into his shoes and wrapped around his hands. By morning, a deep, rattling cough had settled in his chest. He made it to his corner at Chester Station, but customers were scarce in the bitter weather, and Elijah found it increasingly difficult to call out his usual offers, each attempt triggering a painful coughing fit. By afternoon, his head swam with fever, and the station lights blurred and doubled before his eyes. "Elijah?" The voice came from far away, echoing strangely. Elijah tried to focus on the figure crouching before him, but his vision swam. "You're burning up, child." Cool hands pressed against his forehead, his cheeks. "Can you stand?" Elijah tried to nod, but the movement sent pain lancing through his head. He felt himself being lifted. Impossible. William was old and frail. How could he possibly? And then there was movement, voices, the sensation of cold air, and then blessed warmth. Consciousness came and went in fragments after that. A car interior, leather seats, a phone call. William's voice uncharacteristically sharp with command. A building with bright lights, people in white coats, needles, sleep. When Elijah finally woke fully, sunlight was streaming through unfamiliar windows. He lay in a bed with crisp white sheets and IV inserted into his left arm. The room was private, spacious, with equipment that beeped softly beside him. "Welcome back." Elijah turned his head to find William sitting in a chair beside the bed. But this wasn't the William he knew. This man was clean-shaven, his hair neatly trimmed in silver rather than gray. He wore a tailored suit that fit his frame perfectly. Only the eyes remained the same, that clear, piercing blue. Confusion and a sense of betrayal flooded through Elijah. He tried to sit up, but weakness forced him back against the pillows. What's going on? His voice emerged as a croak. "Who are you?" William, if that was even his name, leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "I owe you an explanation and an apology," he said quietly. "My name is William Thornfield. I'm the founder and CEO of Thornfield Investments." The name registered dimly in Elijah's fever-addled brain. Thornfield, the international conglomerate whose headquarters dominated the Chicago skyline. The company worth billions whose founder was famously reclusive, appearing in public only rarely and granting interviews never. "You're not," Elijah began, but a coughing fit interrupted him. William waited patiently for it to subside, then handed Elijah a glass of water. "I am," he said simply, "though the man you met at Chester Station is also me. Perhaps the truest version of myself I've been in many years." He explained how, 6 weeks earlier, he had begun what he called his experiment in perspective, leaving behind his identity, his wealth, his power, to experience life as the invisible people he passed every day experienced it. "I've made billions creating solutions for problems I understood only theoretically," William said, his voice tinged with self-recrimination. "I've donated millions to charities I vetted through reports and statistics. But I've never truly understood the lives I claimed to be improving." So he had disguised himself, limited himself to only the money he could beg or earn through odd jobs, slept in shelters and doorways, eaten at soup kitchens. "And then I met you," William continued, his eyes softening. "A child alone, with every reason to hoard what little you had, to look out only for yourself. Instead, you shared your lunch with a stranger. You showed kindness, expecting nothing in return. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten in my decades of accumulating wealth and power." Elijah stared at the ceiling, emotions too complex to name warring within him. Betrayal that their entire relationship had been built on a lie. Anger at being made some kind of test subject in a billionaire's social experiment. Confusion about what would happen now. "You have pneumonia," William said, shifting topics. "Quite severe. The doctor says you'll need to remain hospitalized for at least a week, possibly longer." "I can't," Elijah protested weakly. "I can't pay for this." "You don't need to worry about that. All expenses are covered." Elijah closed his eyes, humiliation burning hotter than his fever. Charity. Exactly what he'd fought so hard to avoid these past months. "I don't want your money," he said through gritted teeth. William was quiet for a long moment. "What if it wasn't charity?" he finally asked. "What big you were? What if it was an investment?" Elijah opened his eyes, suspicious. "What kind of investment?" "In your future." William leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Elijah, you're intelligent, resourceful, and possess a quality of character that can't be taught. I'd like to offer you an opportunity, not a handout. A place to live, a proper education, and eventually, if you're interested, a position at my company where you would work and advance based on your own merit." It seemed impossible, too much like the fairy tales his mother used to read him before bed. Things like this didn't happen in real life. Not to kids like him. "Why?" The question came out more vulnerable than Elijah intended. "Why me?" William's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Because in a world where I have everything, you offered me half of the only thing you had." The next week in the hospital passed in a blur of antibiotics, breathing treatments, and increasingly stronger visits from William. True to his word, the billionaire came daily, never empty-handed. But he didn't bring the flashy gifts one might expect. No expensive electronics or designer clothes. Instead, he brought books. Some classics Elijah had mentioned missing from his school days. Others, new titles William thought he might enjoy. He brought a small portable chess set and patiently taught Elijah the game over long afternoon visits. Most importantly, he brought stories, not just of his own rise from middle-class origins to extraordinary wealth, but of his failures, his regrets, the human cost of decisions made in boardrooms far removed from their consequences. I've built a life focused on solving problems through technology and finance, William confessed one afternoon as rain streaked the hospital windows. But I've missed the most fundamental truth, that human connection is the solution to our deepest problems. Your simple act of kindness did more for me than all the wealth I've accumulated. By the time Elijah was discharged, the arrangement had been formalized through proper legal channels. William had located Elijah's nearest relative, a maternal aunt in Michigan who had been searching for him since the fire, but had been thwarted by bureaucratic tangles and Elijah's own efforts to remain off the grid. She was willing to become his legal guardian, but acknowledged that her small apartment and 3 children of her own made taking him in difficult. The solution was both practical and generous. Aunt Sarah would maintain legal guardianship, while Elijah would live in a carriage house on William's estate with a live-in housekeeper who would serve as both caretaker and chaperone. Elijah would attend the prestigious Lakeside Academy, with all expenses covered by a formal educational trust established in his name. This isn't charity, William insisted when Elijah's pride threatened to make him refuse. This is me investing in someone who has already proven their exceptional character. The world needs more Elijah Carters making decisions that affect people's lives. The transition wasn't easy. Elijah's first day at Lakeside Academy was a study in contrasts. His second-hand uniform, the best William's assistant could arrange on short notice, standing out among the clearly tailored versions his classmates wore. His unfamiliarity with the technology, the teaching methods, the casual references to summer homes and family vacations that populated his peers' conversations. But Elijah had survived 3 months on the streets through adaptability and keen observation. He watched, he listened, he learned, and gradually the strangeness began to feel less overwhelming. His new home, the carriage house William had converted into a comfortable 2-bedroom residence, became a sanctuary. Mrs. Patel, the housekeeper, was firm but kind, treating Elijah with a respect that acknowledged both his independence and his youth. She taught him to cook simple meals, insisted on regular homework hours, and gave him space to process the seismic shifts in his life. William was a constant, stable presence without being intrusive. Twice weekly dinners at the main house, occasional weekend outings to museums or sporting events, monthly visits to Aunt Sarah and his cousins in Michigan. No demands, no expectations beyond Elijah's best effort in school and honest communication about his needs and feelings. The first breakthrough came 3 months after Elijah's hospitalization. He had been struggling with an advanced math concept, frustration building as the homework deadline approached. William, stopping by unexpectedly with tickets to a Bulls game, found him close to tears at the kitchen table. "I can't do this," Elijah burst out, shame and anger coloring his words. "I don't belong here. I'm not smart enough, not good enough. This was all a mistake." William sat across from him, making no move to touch the abandoned homework. "Do you know how many times I failed before Thornfield became successful?" he asked quietly. Elijah shook his head mutely. 7 companies, 7 complete failures. I lost my first wife because I couldn't let go of my dreams long enough to be present in our marriage. I missed my daughter's childhood chasing success. William's eyes held a sadness Elijah had glimpsed only rarely. The difference between those who succeed and those who don't isn't intelligence or talent or luck, though those all play a part. It's persistence through failure. It's asking for help when you need it. He picked up the math textbook. "Now, what exactly are you struggling with?" That night, after finishing the homework with William's patient guidance, Elijah lay awake staring at the ceiling of his comfortable bedroom. For the first time since his parents' death, he allowed himself to think about them without immediately shutting down the grief. What would they think of his new life? Would they approve of William's role in it? His father's voice seemed to echo in the quiet room. "A man's got to have a trade, something he can be proud of." But maybe a trade wasn't just shining shoes or fixing cars or building houses. Maybe a trade was also learning, growing, becoming someone who could one day help others the way William was helping him. As the months passed, Elijah began to thrive. His natural intelligence, suppressed by survival concerns for so long, flourished under proper education and mentorship. He made friends at school, not many, but a few solid relationships with other scholarship students who understood the strange liminal space between privilege and hardship. 1 year to the day after their first meeting at Chester Station, William took Elijah back to the Shoeshine corner. The familiar sights and sounds hit Elijah with unexpected force. The echo of footsteps on tile, the smell of polish and damp wool, the particular quality of light through the high windows. "Why are we here?" Elijah asked, uncomfortable with the memories the place evoked. William smiled, though his eyes were serious. "To remember where we began, to honor the person you were, the person who, with nothing to his name, still found something to give." From his briefcase, William produced a small wooden box. Elijah recognized it immediately. His father's Shoeshine kit, recovered from the storage facility where the fire department had placed salvageable items from the apartment. "I've had it restored," William explained as Elijah took the box with trembling hands. "The original wood, the original tools, a piece of your history to carry forward." Tears pricked at Elijah's eyes as he ran his fingers over the smooth wood, the brass hinges his father had so carefully attached. "I thought it was gone forever." "Some things are worth preserving," William said quietly. "Some legacies are meant to continue, even as we build new ones." That afternoon, they sat side by side on the station bench, watching the flow of humanity through the space. Business people rushing to meetings, tourists consulting maps, workers heading home after long shifts. Elijah found himself noticing details he'd been too focused on survival to see before. The elderly woman who kept dropping her train pass because her hands shook with what might be Parkinson's. The harried mother trying to manage 3 small children and too many shopping bags. The teenager whose too large clothes and watchful eyes reminded Elijah painfully of himself. "I want to help them," he said suddenly, the realization crystallizing as he spoke. "Not just with money or food or one-time things. I want to change things so kids like me don't end up on the streets in the first place." William nodded, unsurprised. "I thought you might. That's why I've been teaching you not just about investments in business, but about our foundation work." The Thornfield Foundation had become a frequent topic at their dinner discussions. Its focus on educational access, housing stability, and medical care for underserved communities. William had recently been bringing Elijah to foundation meetings, introducing him as a young man with valuable perspective on our mission. "I'd like you to design a project," William continued, "something addressing a need you understand personally. The foundation will fund it as a pilot program, and you'll have a role in implementing it, to the extent your school schedule allows." Elijah stared at him. "You'd trust me with that kind of responsibility?" "I'm 14. Age is rarely the best measure of capacity," William replied. "I trust your character, your intelligence, and most importantly, your lived experience. You understand what these programs need to actually work in a way most of my board members never will, despite all their degrees and credentials." Over the following months, Elijah poured himself into researching and designing what would eventually become the Bridging Lives program, an initiative connecting homeless youth with stable housing, education, job training, and most critically, consistent adult mentorship. The model was based on his own experience with William, but structured to work at scale, with careful screening of both youth and potential mentors. When he presented the completed proposal to the Thornfield Foundation board, Elijah stood tall despite his nervousness, his voice steady as he explained not just the program's mechanics, but its heart. The recognition that material support without human connection was rarely transformative. "My life changed not because someone gave me things," he concluded, looking directly at William, who sat watching with unconcealed pride, "but because someone saw me as a person of value and invested in that value. Every young person deserves that recognition, that investment in their potential." The board approved the pilot unanimously. 2 years later, on Elijah's 16th birthday, William presented him with an unusual gift, a framed newspaper clipping from the business section, announcing the Bridging Lives program's expansion to 5 additional cities following its remarkable success in Chicago. 27 young people now have stable housing, education, and adult support because of your vision, William said as they sat in his study after the small celebration Mrs. Patel had arranged. "That's a significant legacy for someone not yet old enough to drive." Elijah studied the framed article, a complex mix of emotions washing through him. Pride in what he'd accomplished, gratitude for the opportunities that had made it possible, and something deeper, a sense of purpose that had been growing steadily since that day in Chester Station. "I've been thinking about college," he said, setting the frame carefully on the desk between them. William nodded encouragingly. "Yuri, you should be. With your grades and extracurriculars, you'll have excellent options. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Any of them would be fortunate to have you. I want to study social entrepreneurship and public policy. Elijah continued, having researched these fields extensively. I want to learn how to build systems that actually work for people who need them most. An excellent choice, William agreed. The foundation would benefit tremendously from that expertise as you take on more responsibility there. Elijah took a deep breath. That's just it. I'm grateful for everything the foundation has done, everything you've done. But I think I need to build something of my own. Far from being offended, William leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. I was wondering when you'd come to that conclusion. You're not disappointed? Quite the opposite. The greatest success a mentor can have is seeing their protege outgrow them. William's eyes held the same clear, penetrating quality that had first caught Elijah's attention years ago. You have gifts that are uniquely yours, perspectives I can never fully share despite my experiment. The world needs what you alone can build. Relief flooded through Elijah. He'd been anxious about this conversation for weeks, torn between gratitude and the growing certainty that his path, while parallel to William's, needed to be distinct. I'll always be grateful, he said quietly. For everything, William shook his head. Gratitude implies a debt. There is none between us. There never has been. What began with your generosity has come full circle. The boy who shared his lunch created the man who shares his vision for a more just world. If anything, I remain in your debt. On a crisp autumn morning 6 years later, Elijah stood before the converted warehouse that now housed the headquarters of Carter Community Capital, the social impact investment firm he'd founded after graduating with honors from Georgetown. The organization focused on funding community-based solutions to housing insecurity, educational inequity, and workforce development, with a particular emphasis on programs designed by those with lived experience of these challenges. At 22, Elijah was already making waves in both business and philanthropic circles. His approach, combining rigorous financial standards with deep community engagement, had attracted both investors seeking social returns and community organizations tired of traditional philanthropy's limitations. As he unlocked the door, his phone buzzed with a text from William. Front page of the Tribune business section. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. Lunch next week? Elijah smiled, tapping back a quick confirmation before pocketing his phone. Their relationship had evolved over the years from mentor-protege to something closer to family, with a deep mutual respect that transcended their different generations and backgrounds. Inside, he paused in the lobby where a simple plaque hung beside the reception desk. It bore no grand mission statement, no list of donors or accomplishments, just a short quote. The measure of our lives is found in what we give when we have little, not what we accumulate when we have much. Beneath those words was a small image, a perfectly rendered Shoeshine box, its brass latches catching the light. Elijah touched the plaque briefly, a ritual he performed each morning. Then he continued to his office where the day's work awaited. Meetings with community partners, calls with investors, planning sessions for the new youth entrepreneurship program launching next month. Outside his office window, Chicago stretched in all directions, a city of stark contrasts, gleaming towers and struggling neighborhoods, extraordinary wealth and persistent poverty. Somewhere in that cityscape, Chester Station continued its daily rhythm, thousands passing through its halls, most never noticing the corner where a hungry boy had once shared his lunch with a stranger. Elijah could still feel the weight of that half sandwich in his hand sometimes, could still see the surprise in those blue eyes when he'd offered it. Such a small thing, an act that had cost him little more than temporary hunger. Yet it had altered the trajectory of not just his life, but countless others through the ripples of change he'd been empowered to create. As he settled at his desk, Elijah thought of the children currently enrolled in Bridging Lives programs across 7 cities, the families housed through Carter Community Capital's investments, the small businesses launched with seed funding from his microfinance initiative. Each connection, each opportunity creating its own potential for transformation. And it had all begun with the simplest human impulse, to share what little you have with someone who seems to have even less. An orphaned Shoeshine boy had shared his lunch with a beggar, only to learn he'd fed a secret billionaire. But the true lesson wasn't about the billionaire's identity or even his subsequent generosity. It was about the boy himself, about the capacity for kindness that exists in each human heart, waiting only for the courage to act upon it. Elijah opened his laptop and began his day's work, certain of only one thing: that kindness, freely given, contains within it the power to transform not just individual lives, but the very structures of the world itself.